He stood at the altar without a single family member in sight and for once felt whole. But what happened after the wedding revealed a lifetime of manipulation he never saw coming. They say weddings bring families together, but mine did the exact opposite. And not because I wanted it that way, but because I had no choice left. I was standing at the altar beside the woman I loved, looking out at a room filled with people who cared about me, and the only thing missing was my entire bloodline. And somehow that made the day feel more complete than any moment they ever showed up for. Growing up, I always thought there was something broken in me, like I came with a part missing that other kids just got handed at birth, like a sense of being wanted. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Chicago, in a house that looked like it was pulled from some real estate brochure. But behind that clean exterior was a home where love had a direction, and it sure as hell wasn't pointing toward me. I'm Nate, 29 now, and for the first 9 years of my life, things were good, normal even. My parents split their attention pretty evenly between me and my younger brother, Neil. Then one day, Neil had a coughing fit at a soccer game, and everything I knew about family flipped inside out. The doctor called it asthma, said it was manageable. But to my parents, it was a revelation, a sacred calling. From that moment forward, everything, and I mean everything, revolved around Neil's health. My folks weren't abusive, not in the traditional sense. They didn't yell or hit or drink. But they abandoned me in the slowest, most invisible way possible, by making me an afterthought. When I was 12, I had a piano recital. Months of practice, a complicated solo that even my teacher said was ambitious for my age. My parents swore they'd be in the front row. I even saved a seat for them. But when the curtain rose, that seat was empty. Neil had a flare-up, or so they claimed. I found out later from my grandmother that Neil had been at home all night playing video games. The next morning, Mom said, "We're so proud of you anyway, honey." As if that made it okay. At 16, it happened again, only worse. My grandparents had flown in from Florida to celebrate my birthday. We planned a small backyard party. Mom and Dad were supposed to pick up the cake and decorations. Instead, they disappeared with Neil to urgent care. He had abdominal pain. Turned out to be gas. Real medical mystery. Huh? They showed up late with a half-eaten cake. Said Neil had been hungry while they waited in the ER. That was my birthday. I wish I could say those were isolated incidents. But it became a pattern. Milestones? Skipped. Celebrations? Overshadowed. Accomplishments? Ignored. The final straw for me was graduation. I was valedictorian. I had a perfect GPA and held down 2 jobs through high school. I stood on that stage, gave my speech, and looked into a crowd where the only familiar faces were my best friend's parents. My own folks were at home because Neil had a panic attack over finals that weren't even scheduled till the next week. They missed my moment because he felt overwhelmed, but I kept pushing forward. I got into college, paid my way through by waiting tables and working in a lab. While Neil had a fully funded college plan, just in case his condition got worse, I lived off ramen and caffeine. I told myself it was just the way things were, that maybe if I worked hard enough, I'd earn their attention. But by the time I finished my master's degree, they didn't even show up to the ceremony. Neil had a migraine. Later that same night, I saw him post pictures from a party on Instagram. He was smiling, arms around friends, clearly not in agony. Meanwhile, I sat alone in my cap and gown, nursing a beer and wondering what it would take to be seen. That's when I started building a life outside of them. One that didn't require permission or praise. One that didn't revolve around Neil's next crisis. And that's when I met Jamie. Jamie didn't just walk into my life. She quietly rearranged everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and what it meant to truly be seen. We met at a research conference in Denver. 2 sleep-deprived scientists competing for the same grant who somehow found common ground over lukewarm coffee and mutual exhaustion. What started as a casual conversation about enzyme pathways turned into a 3-hour dinner. And by the end of that week, I was hooked on the way she listened like my words actually mattered. Because with her, they did. The first time I met her family was on her dad's birthday. Jamie had warned me they were a loud, affectionate bunch, and I braced myself for chaos. But what I found was the kind of chaos that heals. Her mom pulled me into a hug like I'd known her for years. Her sisters teased Jamie in that easy, loving way that only comes when people feel safe. And her dad, he handed me a beer and said, "Welcome to the zoo," before dragging me into a conversation about hiking trails and home repairs. It was like stepping into a life where love wasn't rationed. I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like to be chosen. On my birthday that year, Jamie's family threw me a surprise party. Her younger brother baked a cake that looked like a disaster but tasted amazing. Her dad gave me a new set of tools because I'd once mentioned I liked fixing things. Her mom made a scrapbook page titled, "Nate's First Family Birthday." I laughed, smiled, even teared up a little when no one was looking, because no one in my own family had ever gone to that kind of trouble. Not once. Every little gesture from Jamie's family started to fill a hole I didn't know I was still carrying. When I got promoted at work, Jamie's mom sent flowers to my office. When I published my first paper, her sister framed the first page and gave it to me as a gift. They didn't just celebrate me, they remembered me. I wasn't the kid who got left behind. I wasn't the guy they forgot to cheer for. I was Nate, the scientist, the boyfriend, the son-in-law-to-be. And man, that felt good. So when I proposed to Jamie 3 years into our relationship, I already knew I wasn't just marrying her. I was marrying the idea of being truly valued, maybe for the first time in my life. We set the wedding for early fall, at this little vineyard about 40 minutes from the city. As we went down the list of who to invite, Jamie asked about my side. "What about your parents? Neil?" she asked gently, her hand resting on mine. I looked down at the table, swirling the edge of my coffee mug with my finger. "I want to," I said, "but I know what'll happen." And I could picture it all too clearly. My mom ducking out during our vows because Neil suddenly had a flare-up. My dad sitting in the corner, checking his phone for updates on Neil's condition. Or worse, Neil stealing the spotlight with some dramatic medical episode that turned our wedding into his stage. Sounds cruel, I know, but history doesn't lie. Jamie never pressured me. She just said, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Just don't invite pain into something that's supposed to be joyful." So I made a choice, a hard one, but a necessary one. I didn't invite them. Instead, we invited the people who had actually shown up, her family, my friends, a few distant cousins who'd always quietly rooted for me. I called my grandparents and told them gently what I was doing. They said, "Good. It's about time someone looked out for you." We planned a wedding that felt like us. Simple, genuine, full of laughter. Her dad walked her down the aisle, her sisters stood by her side, and I stood across from the woman who had become my anchor. There were no emergency exits needed, no medical distractions, no guilt trips waiting in the wings. It was just joy, finally, without interruption. And yet, I knew it couldn't last. Not once the photos started making their way online. Because the silence I bought by leaving them off the guest list, that was about to shatter. I didn't expect peace to last, but I didn't think it would collapse that fast either. It started the morning after the wedding, when my cousin Ryan, bless his heart, posted a picture of Jamie and me on Instagram. Just one photo, her in her dress, me in my suit, the vineyard glowing gold in the background. The caption read, "Two amazing people who finally got the day they deserved." That was all it took. By noon, my phone lit up like a war zone. Missed calls, voicemails, texts from numbers I hadn't seen in years. My mom left a message that started off calm but devolved fast, accusing me of being vindictive and cruel and spiteful beyond belief. She said I had humiliated them in front of the entire family, and that I should be ashamed for breaking Neil's heart. My dad's message was more calculated. Cold, flat voice. A real son would understand what family means. "You've always been selfish, Nate. Always." And then came Neil, of course. He texted me a selfie from a hospital bed, oxygen mask on, for in his arm, pale face. The caption, "Guess this is what happens when your brother betrays you." I stared at the image for a long time, not because I believed it, but because I knew exactly what he was doing. He was setting the stage, playing the part. I almost admired the consistency. But what really rattled me wasn't the drama. It was a message from my cousin Kay. She called and asked, "Did you hear what your mom told people?" Apparently, they were telling extended family that Neil had been hospitalized due to stress over being excluded from the wedding. Claimed he had a severe asthma attack when he saw the wedding pictures, that it triggered anxiety-induced breathing trouble and they had to rush him to the ER. But Kay, sharp as ever, had seen Neil that same day at a baseball game. Laughing. Drinking. Not exactly a picture of medical distress. She said, "Nate, I think they're spinning this whole thing into a narrative where you're the villain." I wasn't surprised, but I was tired of being dragged into this circus every time I tried to create something for myself. Jamie's mom, who's a pediatric nurse with 30 years under her belt, decided to step in. She called my mom, not to scold, not to shame, just to ask if maybe this whole thing was being blown out of proportion. She mentioned gently that Neil's so-called health issues didn't seem consistent with someone who plays in 2 intramural sports leagues, hikes on weekends, and just ran a 10K. My mother hung up on her. Then, for good measure, she called Jamie's sister to complain about outsiders meddling in family affairs. I didn't know whether to be angry or impressed. It was like they were trying to prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that I'd made the right decision. But all of it, the voicemails, the accusations, the carefully curated guilt, it stirred something in me I hadn't felt in years. I started remembering things I'd pushed deep down, things I had quietly filed away as just the way things were. Like the time I saved for months to buy a suit for homecoming, only for Neil to collapse with stomach pain as I was tying my tie. I waited for hours in the living room, dressed to the nines, while my date eventually went without me. Turned out Neil had gas. They came home at midnight with fast food bags and no apology. Or the time I got selected for a national science competition. My parents were supposed to come with me to the final round out of state. Neil twisted his ankle slightly at a family picnic 2 days before. My parents canceled their trip. Neil got a brace. I went alone. I'd lived through 100 small abandonments that I never dared name. And now, here they were, replaying the same script, only this time it was supposed to ruin my wedding. Except it didn't, because Jamie's family stepped up. Her dad gave the toast I always dreamed of hearing. Her mom zipped up Jamie's dress while whispering, "Your family now too." Her sisters made sure my tux was perfect, my nerves were steady, and my smile was real. The people who weren't blood made me feel more like a son than my own parents ever had. And for the first time I started to wonder, was this really about Neil? Or had it always been about control? I didn't have the answer yet, but it was coming. Because Kay was about to show me something that would blow this whole thing wide open. I met up with Kay a few days later at this quiet coffee shop we used to hit during college breaks. She was already there when I walked in, tapping her phone nervously like she had something she didn't want to say out loud in public. I barely sat down before she looked me straight in the eye and said, "I know something about Neil, and it's worse than you think." I leaned in, not sure what I was bracing for, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. Kay hesitated, then opened her phone and scrolled to a screen of text messages. She turned it toward me without a word. The messages were from years ago, but I recognized Neil's number instantly. It was a drunken confession. He had told her, during some family party when they were both teenagers, that he faked his asthma symptoms. Not sometimes, not occasionally, but regularly, because it was the only way to get attention. He said he learned early that being sick made him untouchable. He could get out of chores, out of trouble, out of having to compete with me. And when I started doing well in school or getting recognition, he'd ramp things up, make himself the center again. Kay never told me, said she didn't want to come between us, didn't want to start drama. But when she saw the wedding fallout, the hospital stunt, the guilt parade, they all tipped the scale. "You deserved to know the truth," she said. And then, like she was dropping the real bombshell, she added, "That's not all. Your mom. She was in on it." I felt like the air got sucked out of the room. She showed me another set of texts, recent ones, this time from just a week before our wedding. They were between her and my mom. In one message, my mom said she was worried Neil might feel unwell on the wedding day, worried he might act out if things became too emotional. She said something like, "We'll have to be ready in case he needs support," but then added a line that made my stomach turn. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad if people remembered what really matters that day. I read that line over and over again. It was like a punch to the chest. They weren't just reactive. They were planning a disruption. Before they even knew they weren't invited. They were going to hijack our day. They were going to use his illness as a stage. I sat there stunned, staring at my coffee going cold. Kay looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. I thought I could ignore it, Nate. I really did. But when I saw how they turned the whole family against you after the wedding, I just couldn't stay quiet anymore. We talked for hours that night. Replayed everything. The missing birthdays. The hospital visits. The way Neil always managed to have a crisis whenever I had something worth celebrating. Kay even brought up the summer science program I got into after junior year, a huge opportunity, fully paid, at a prestigious university across the state. I'd been ecstatic. But 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave, Neil had a mysterious flare-up. My parents said it wasn't safe for the family to be split up during a medical crisis. Told me to defer the program until the next year. I never went, and I never got the invite again. I didn't see it then, I said quietly. I thought it was just bad timing. Kay shook her head. It wasn't bad timing. It was a pattern. And you were the casualty. That night, I showed Jamie everything, every message, every lie. She sat in silence, processing it all. Then she looked at me, her voice steady and warm. I'm sorry you had to grow up with that. But I'm glad you don't have to carry it alone anymore. It was a moment of clarity. Years of gaslighting, doubt, and quiet rage suddenly clicked into something solid, something real. I hadn't been selfish. I hadn't been dramatic. I'd been played. And this time I had proof. The next day, Kay forwarded the messages to a few other relatives, people who had sided with my parents, called me cold, said I should have invited them. Within hours, I started getting apologies. My uncle called and said I always had a feeling something was off, but I didn't want to get involved. It wasn't vindication exactly. But it was the start of something I hadn't felt in a long time, relief. Still, part of me wanted to hear it straight from the source. I tried reaching out to Neil. No response. Kay said he was ghosting everyone now, probably wallowing in guilt or doubling down in denial. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the screaming, vengeful way. I was done fighting for their approval. I was done wondering what I could have done differently. Because now I knew it was never about what I did. It was about what they wanted to believe. And I had finally stopped playing that role. I hadn't heard from Neil in weeks after Kay confronted him. I figured he was hiding, or maybe too deep in whatever bubble he and my parents had created to face the truth. Part of me didn't even want a response anymore. I had made peace with what happened, or at least started to, but closure was a luxury I'd stopped expecting. So when I opened my inbox one morning and saw his name at the top of an unread email, my chest tightened like I'd been dropped underwater. The subject line was simple: I owe you the truth. I clicked it, half expecting a half-hearted excuse, or worse, more guilt masquerading as honesty. But what I found, it floored me. Neil admitted everything. He started the message with a paragraph about therapy, how he'd been seeing someone for anxiety and depression, and how those sessions had turned into something deeper. He said the therapist had pushed him to examine his past, his patterns, the way he interacted with the world. And eventually that led him to me. I built my identity around being the center of everything, he wrote. Not because I was sick, but because it was the only time I felt seen. And I'm ashamed of how far I let that go. He confessed to faking asthma attacks, migraines, stomach pains, dozens of symptoms he used to pull our parents' focus. He said it became a game at first, a way to skip school or get out of responsibilities. But when he realized it also pulled attention away from me, it became something darker. I was jealous, he admitted. You were smart, driven, respected. I couldn't compete with that. But I could disrupt it. So I did. He listed events: my homecoming, the science competition, my graduation, even the piano recital when we were kids. He remembered them all. And in each one, he had found a way to insert himself into the center. Not because he needed to, but because he couldn't stand not being the most important person in the room. But what hit me hardest wasn't the confession. It was this line. You deserved a brother, and I became your rival instead. He talked about our parents too, how they reinforced the dynamic by rewarding him every time he was ill. How their concern made him feel important in a way nothing else could. He wrote that he knew they enabled it, but he never expected to find out that they were planning to weaponize it at my wedding. When Kay showed him our mom's messages, those messages about possibly creating a distraction, he said he got physically sick. That broke me, he wrote. Seeing that in writing made me realize just how deep the dysfunction runs. And I don't want to live in it anymore. Then came the part one never expected. He defended me. He wrote that I was right not to invite them. That I made the healthy choice. That I had every right to protect my wedding from the chaos they were ready to unleash. He said if you had invited us, I guarantee something would have happened. We would have found a way to steal your joy. And I hate that I know that's true. He asked for a chance to rebuild something, not a fake truce for appearances, but a real relationship, one built on honesty and distance from our parents' manipulations. He said he was looking for a full-time job, planning to move into his own place, and cutting financial ties to mom and dad, even though it would be hard. I don't want to be that guy anymore, he wrote. And I'm sorry it took losing you to realize that. I must have read that email a dozen times. My emotions swung like a pendulum: relief, sorrow, skepticism, grief. Because yeah, it was an apology. But it was also a reminder of everything I never got and everything I still wouldn't. I showed it to Jamie. She read it slowly, then looked at me with those calm, wise eyes and said, "You don't owe him anything. But if you want to talk to him, I'll be there." So I wrote back. Short, careful, honest. I told him I appreciated the message. That I needed time to figure out what rebuilding would even look like. That trust would take more than words. But I also said, I'm glad you're trying. For both our sakes. The next day, I got a call from my mom. I didn't answer. Let it ring out. She left a voicemail. Said Neil had betrayed the family, that he was choosing my side over theirs, and that he would regret turning against the people who've always taken care of him. The voice wasn't angry. It was desperate. But not desperate for truth, desperate to keep control. I didn't respond. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't interested in pleasing them, fixing things, or walking back my boundaries. I was building something better now, with Jamie, with our new life in Boston, with people who actually knew how to love without strings. And maybe, just maybe, that included my brother someday. The thing about finally setting boundaries is this: you start to realize just how many people were only ever in your life because you didn't have them. And once you do, the silence that follows? It's not lonely. It's peace. After Neil's email and my quiet response, I figured my parents would either retreat into guilt or launch a full campaign to win him back and punish me in the process. What I didn't expect was for them to do both at the same time and burn every last bit of goodwill they had left in the process. It started small. A few ignored calls from my mom. One from my dad. Then they started messaging Jamie. At first, it was polite, fake polite. My mom wrote, "We hope you're enjoying your new life in Boston. Please remind Nate that family still loves him." Jamie didn't respond. She knew better than to step into the trap. Then came the escalation. My dad left me a voicemail the night after Neil told them he was moving out. His tone was icy. He said I was tearing the family apart, that I'd filled Neil's head with lies, and that my selfish, narcissistic hunger for attention was turning my brother against his own parents. The kicker? He ended the voicemail by saying, "A real son would make this right. But I guess we only raised one of those." I played the message back once, then deleted it. Jamie asked if I was okay, and for the first time in months, I really was. Because I realized something in that moment: the man who left that message? He didn't know me. Not the man I am. Not the life I built. Not the love I found. He only ever knew the version of me that lived in Neil's shadow. And I wasn't that person anymore. But it wasn't over. A week later, Kate texted me, "You need to see this." She sent screenshots of a group chat my mom had with a few extended relatives. My name came up more than once. "He's changed," my mom had written. "We don't even recognize him anymore. Jamie must have turned him against us. They're trying to make Neil feel like a villain when he's the one who's sick. They've always been jealous of the bond Neil and I had. Now they're trying to poison him too." It wasn't just sad. It was calculated. Rewriting history in real time, trying to shift blame, weaponize pity, and play the role of the wounded mother abandoned by her ungrateful son. But the worst part? She was already preparing the next lie. "She's a nurse, right?" my mom wrote, referring to Jamie's mother. "If we say she manipulated Neil into thinking he was never sick, maybe people will believe he was brainwashed." I stared at that line for a long time. I couldn't decide if it made me want to laugh or scream. Instead, I screenshotted it, filed it away, and blocked my parents' numbers for good this time. No warning. No dramatic confrontation. Just silence. Because they didn't deserve another word from me. Neil texted me the next day. He said he'd officially moved into a studio across town and was working on a full-time job offer. He mentioned my parents had threatened to cut him off financially if he didn't renounce me. His words, not mine. He said I told them I wasn't picking sides. I was choosing sanity. For the first time, I believed him. Jamie and I started settling into our life in Boston. Our apartment wasn't big, but it had big windows and a quiet street lined with maple trees that flamed gold in the fall. I got a position at a biotech firm doing research I actually cared about. She started teaching at a nearby university, and our weekends filled with farmers markets, jazz records, and the kind of quiet laughter that tells you you're finally safe. Her family came to visit 2 weeks after we moved. Her dad helped us hang curtains. Her mom brought a homemade pie and left us a starter plant for the windowsill. Her sisters fought over who got the guest room. It was chaos. Beautiful, healing chaos. At dinner that night, her dad gave another one of his signature toasts. He raised his glass and said, "To the people who show up, stay present, and don't need a crisis to prove they care." I don't think he meant it as a shot at my past. But I felt it anyway. Afterward, as we were clearing dishes, Jamie walked over, slid her arms around my waist, and said, "You good?" I nodded. "Yeah, I think I finally am." Because I wasn't looking back anymore. And if that bridge behind me was nothing but ash and smoke, so be it. Life was starting to breathe differently. I had space in my chest again, like I was finally inhaling without that invisible weight pressing down. Boston gave me distance, Jamie gave me peace, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by what I didn't have. I was just Nate. No roles, no rivalry, no tightrope between guilt and resentment. Then, out of nowhere, I got the letter. Not a text. Not an email. A real, handwritten letter in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in shaky cursive on the envelope, my mom's handwriting. My first instinct was to toss it, let it rot with the rest of the junk. But something stopped me. Not curiosity, exactly. More like a quiet need to see what kind of story they were telling themselves now. I opened it on the balcony, sun dipping low behind the skyline, a coffee gone cold in my hand. Inside were 3 pages of emotional gymnastics that tried to rewrite the last 2 decades in soft, passive tones. She opened with, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." She wrote about missing me, about how holidays weren't the same, about how no one carves the turkey like you do, and how the house feels emptier without your laughter. No mention of the things she'd said. No mention of the voicemail. No mention of trying to sabotage my wedding. She wrote that Neil was confused and hurting and that she wished we could come together as a family again. Then came the real reason for the letter. She wanted to visit. She wanted to see our new place, meet Jamie's family properly, and have an honest conversation about healing. She ended with this, "You'll always be my son. I just want to feel like your mother again." I stared at those words for a long time. Not because they moved me. Because they almost did. There was a time I would have jumped at that offer. A time when I would have given anything just to hear her say something close to that. But now it just felt hollow. Not an apology. Not accountability. Just nostalgia weaponized as bait. I didn't show the letter to Jamie right away. I needed to sit with it first. Let the noise settle in my head. The memories clawed back in, the birthdays missed, the lies, the piano recital, the hospital visits that stole my spotlight. And through it all, her voice always saying, "Neil needs us. You understand, right?" I'd understood. I'd understood so well that I taught myself how to vanish. That night, I finally handed Jamie the letter. She read it quietly, then set it down like it was something fragile and cursed all at once. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I want to send it back," I said. "Return to sender." Jamie smiled, just a little. "You don't have to do anything, Nate. Not this time." But I knew I had to say something. Not to make peace. Not for her. For me. So I wrote back. Not 3 pages, just 1. I told her I received her letter. I told her I appreciated the thought. And I told her that healing doesn't come from ignoring the damage, it comes from owning it. I wrote, "You say you want to feel like my mother again. But that requires more than presence. It requires change. It requires truth. And I haven't seen any of that from you." I told her I wasn't ready for a visit. That Jamie and I were building something healthy, and I wouldn't jeopardize that for a conversation that would likely just reopen old wounds. I ended it with, "You're welcome to try again. But not with guilt. Not with revisionist history. If you ever want to be part of my life, you'll have to meet me in the present. Not pull me back into the past." I mailed it the next morning. I don't know what she thought when she read it. She hasn't replied. And honestly, I don't need her to. Because what she doesn't realize is, I am healing. Just not the way she hoped. The last few months have been the quietest of my life, and maybe that's why they've meant more than all the noise that came before. No phone calls from my parents. No guilt-laced letters. No backhanded texts from Neil. Just the sound of my life moving forward, one breath at a time. Jamie and I found a rhythm here in Boston. Mornings with black coffee and quiet smiles. Weekends spent walking through the park or painting the office we turned into a shared workspace. Her family still checks in regularly, her mom sends soup recipes, her dad sends bad jokes, and her sisters FaceTime just to ask about the dog we're planning to adopt next spring. It's the kind of ordinary I used to think was reserved for someone else. And somewhere in all that stillness I found something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Peace. Not just the kind that comes from silence. The kind that settles in your bones when you finally stop trying to win love from the people who only ever gave it conditionally. I used to think if I tried hard enough, if I earned enough, achieved enough, sacrificed enough, I could make them love me the way I needed. I thought if I just proved myself, they'd show up. But that was the lie. The one I lived in for years. The truth is simpler and harder. You can't make people value what they've never truly seen. And sometimes, the most painful part of healing is accepting that their failure to love you right isn't your fault. It never was. I still think about Neil. We've exchanged a few messages here and there, short check-ins, small steps. He seems to be doing the work finally, though it's early. He says he's staying in therapy. He's got a job now. He hasn't asked for anything. That alone feels like progress. I don't know if we'll ever be close. But I do know this, he's trying. And that matters. As for my parents, I haven't heard from them since the letter. Not a word. Maybe they're angry. Maybe they're waiting. Or maybe they finally understand that the version of me who bent over backward for scraps of attention, he doesn't live here anymore. Jamie asked me the other night if I'd ever consider reconciliation. I sat with the question for a long while, then answered the only way I knew how. I'd consider truth. I'd consider accountability. But I won't consider silence dressed as love ever again. Because what I've learned is this: forgiveness isn't about pretending it didn't happen. It's about letting go of the need to make them understand. It's about freeing yourself from the prison of their approval. I didn't invite my family to my wedding. And for a long time I wondered if that made me cold. But now I see it differently. I protected the one day I couldn't afford to lose. And in doing that I reclaimed every other day that followed. That's not cruelty. That's survival. That's love turned inward finally. Jamie and I just hit 6 months married. Her mom sent us a handmade quilt with our initials stitched in the corner. Her dad left a voicemail saying, "Proud of you, kid." No fanfare. No strings. Just presents. And as I stood in our little kitchen that night, arms around my wife, watching the city lights flicker through the window, I realized something I wish I could have told the scared kid I used to be. You were never too much. You were just too bright for people who never bothered to open their eyes. So if you're out there, carrying your own story of being overlooked, overshadowed, quietly forgotten, just know this. You are not the problem. And you don't need to light yourself on fire just to keep people warm who never learned how to love without burning. Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you'll ever do. Sometimes it's the first step toward finding home. And for me, I finally did.